Hi, my name is Sochil, pronounced phonetically as Sochi or Sochil, Sochil. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as a Latina or Latinx woman and a Mexican American. Please do not call me white when referencing my race or ethnicity on a demographic form, as that is an erasure of Mexico's indigenous roots. My family is from Guerrero, Mexico, with my parents being specifically from Acapulco, Guerrero. I speak English, Spanish, very little high school French, and a lot of Spanglish. This is what looking bilingual means to me.
Your parents, particularly your dad, wanted very strongly to name you Sochi. Can you talk about that and what you know about your name's origins?
It is originated from an Aztec dialect, so it does mean flower. The reason why my name came about is for two reasons. One, my sister's name was already Nayeli, so she already had an origin to our indigenous roots. And my parents kind of were like, well, let's just keep the theme going. But at the same time, the reason why both of these names came about is because my dad has a lot of Mexican pride, honestly. He's very, very proud. And I grew up with a dad who's very, very proud and taught us to be very proud of our roots. So being here when I was born, because I was born in the United States already, and my parents had been here for a few years, they wanted something that would tie me back to our roots. So in naming me, they decided we're gonna keep a theme, but we're also gonna give her something. I need my kids to have that same amount of pride that I have for the place where I was born. I'll be honest, I don't think even my parents are fully pronouncing it right because I think it's supposed to be Xochitl, being from where we are from, like Acapulco, Guerrero, it's city. So they don't actually have that tied to indigenous. I couldn't tell you if we have what amount of indigenous background we have, but they have that understanding of no matter what we have those roots.
Yeah, and I think that's beautiful, and it's funny you mentioned that because somebody I was just speaking to yesterday was talking about, now her family's from Puebla, but she was also referring to the fact that they don't know exactly which indigenous, communities that their family come from, but that her parents actually incorporate some indigenous words or words that are clearly indigenous, that are not Spanish, or even influenced by Spanish into their vocabulary, but they can't tell you from where. And that's just so interesting that despite not knowing that there's still pride there and there's still recognition, which I
Yeah.
think is really important, especially as you continue to pass it on and even move your family to a different country.
Oh yeah.
So,
And I
so
love.
you said you identify as Latina and Mexican American. How important are those markers for you in contrast with others potentially seen amongst Mexican Americans?
I grew up in Orange County, California, where most of the people that I met who were Latinx were Mexican American, right? So for years, as I was growing up, and I mentioned the pride that my dad had in his Mexican roots, and it was a very strange thing as I was growing up because I had that. I knew that there was no denying my identity as Mexican American. What I didn't have a full comprehension until I want to say maybe I got to college was being Latina. Like it was the conversation wasn't ever really you're Latina. I knew that there was a world outside of Mexico because my dad was the kind of person who read us folk tales. Like I remember growing up with El Rey Colibri, different things like that, which are not from actually from Mexico, right? But so I knew that there was a world outside, but it was a strange situation growing up, getting older, and realize I'm not just Mexican American, I'm Latina, and starting to steer away from just Mexican pride, starting to get a little more involved, and even teaching my parents a little bit more about what it meant to be Latina or Latino, right? So that for me was a really interesting transition, and I think one of the things that was most important to me was realizing as Mexican American, and I'm first generation born here, I'm not the only one that can be associated to, right? Like I can't just associate to Mexican Americans. There's a whole world of people having the same struggles. There's a whole world of first generations out there who I did not realize for a very long time. Hey, you don't have to be a Mexican American to just have that, connection. You can connect with so many people. To me, that was super important, and I think because my parents gave me that connection to my Mexican American roots, it was a little bit better or easier for me to finally be like, hey, there's more out there, like let's be proud of it all.
Personal story has influenced your professional journey as well. So Could you tell us a little bit more about that and the work you currently do?
I work in the mental health field now, and I've been doing it for over 2 years now. For a very long time throughout college, throughout high school, and even a little bit before mental health, I focused a lot on like advocacy work of like systematic changes, right? In the mental health field, I've always said, the reason why I'm here is because of my parents, because I saw, yes, systematic change is so, so, so important, but I would have loved for somebody to be there and speaking to them individually. So I I've tried to learn a balance between both my professional work, and then I've started to do advocacy work through volunteer work that I can do like in certain organizations. So even if I'm not, that's not my profession, it's still something I'm involved. And part of it is because my dad is the kind of person who talks to everyone, and that's a great thing. When you're growing up, you're like, why do we got to talk to everyone, right? But at the same time, like he talked to everyone, and he was involved in everything. There's a marcha, and I believe it was every May 1st. I don't think it happened these past 2 years, but it was to highlight the undocumented folks and the need for citizenship. And my dad was there for many years, which was the strangest thing to me because the man is claustrophobic. I'm like, how are you able to be in a crowd,
Wow.
right? So
Yeah.
for me, that's where I was like, I have to do something for my community. I have to do something where like my heart always goes to the undocumented folks, the immigrant folks. Like I have to do something. So when in my professional field, whenever we get folks like this, I feel that ability to help them because I saw my parents, and I know that everyone is a very individual person, and that actually helps me because I know that every parent that comes to me is going to be different. I know that in my own way, I'm doing the advocacy work, and I'm teaching them how to advocate for themselves. I'm reminding them, hey, like you're a great person, you're an adventurous person, you're an amazing person for doing what you're doing for your kids being here. So I think with my parents particularly, that's how, because of their travel, because of the way they reframed everything as we are we're great people for being here, we're brave, for being here. That's what made me capable and wanting even more to help other people see that.
And switching over to the topic of language, how did your family, especially the women in your family, mold your relationship with the Spanish language?
Ooh, I think that one is such an interesting question because I have three. When we talk about the women in my family, I think of three people. My abuelita, my mom, and my sister. With my sister, it's so interesting because she basically grew up with the exact same language that I did.
Mhm.
Spanish first, English throughout school. And so as I'm growing up, we're talking, and I think with her, it was this situation of, so you know how sometimes you're like, I don't know any language, like I can't think of a phrase in English or Spanish.
Yeah.
It was like that. Like I felt that like somebody else understood what I was going through. But I think one of the things that it did is it really did make her my best friend because we could have that connection. With my mom, and one of the things that I learned with her is when it comes to my friends, growing up here, you bring friends and partners that don't speak the same language that you do. And never once has she had a problem with that. I've seen them have conversations. She's speaking in Spanish and they're speaking in English, you
Yes.
know, and so and
I
every
like that.
yeah, and I'm like, how are you doing this? All right, whatever, like, and it's a serious conversation, and I think for me, what I learned about language with her is it doesn't matter what language you speak, you can still show love and kindness. With my abuelita, it was interesting because again, I was fluent, but I wasn't somebody who had the experience of seeing her every summer or every day. I spent one summer with her when I was 6 years old, and
Oh,
I was lucky that in that time English wasn't that strong of a language to me. So when I was there no language barriers, right? But what it did do is it embedded this love, like una semillita de amor with her. Like I felt that love. And when I got here, or I came back and I never got to see her again, really it was mostly phone calls of ¿Cómo estás? ¿Cómo te va? ¿Cómo vas en la escuela? But when it came to school, I couldn't tell her what I was doing. So I
right.
think in that sense, what it did for me with language was it made me realize there is still a barrier, not just in language of actual like Spanish, English, but the phrases you start to use as you get older. I couldn't tell her like what American studies was or why I was doing American studies. I couldn't tell her I'm gonna get a bachelor's, not a master's. It made me realize, yes, you can have the same language, but sometimes even then there's a barrier. There's like this wall, and it actually makes you want to connect to them more. Like now that she's passed away, I'm like, I pray to her and I'm like, now she can understand me, and I tell her like all my problems. I tell her everything at work, and I'm like, you're getting it, you see it.
Yeah, I do the same thing with my grandpa. Oh my goodness, you're getting me choked up. But like, yeah, like I do the same thing. I'm like, oh, I could say these things now, and you understand exactly what you said.
Yep.
Exactly. I'm like, do you get it now? Do you get why I did this, and this?
I'm like, I won't explain it. Tú lo viste, right? You saw what happened today at work. Like, you see why I'm mad.
Yeah, and it's funny because we're laughing, but I laugh like this too, and I'm just like, tu ve, like.
Yeah. I'm like, ¿ves see what you taught your daughter? Eso fue lo que le enseñaste. That's all you.
Yeah, exactly. I've often pictured my grandfather laughing at things, being like, I was like, I know, dude, I know, I don't know.
I know. That's what I did too.
Yeah, and sometimes I don't know if you felt this. Sometimes I think, and potentially when he first passed away, which was 7 years ago, I felt bad speaking to him in English sometimes because I was like, no, man, I gotta just like, so there was like some sort of guilt there too because I was like, damn, I should know more or I should know better to explain this. And eventually I was like, no, he understands, gets
exactly.
it, he appreciates it. Oh, the fact you said that, I feel so seen right now.
It's true.
Yeah. And even now with my grandmother, oh gosh, she'll say things. Oh no, porque tú eres una profesora en una universidad, ¿verdad? In España when I was in Spain. And I was like, no, I am not a professor at a university. Do not spread these rumors. Forget it. I'm just like,
Oh, it doesn't have to be your grandparents. Like my title is case manager. So people ask my parents, what do you do? What does she do? And they'll be like, I don't know. Like she does this type of work. And they'll be like, so is she a social worker? I think so. I'm like, I'm not. Like, let's not go. No. Like, no.
Yeah, there's a point where you're just like, all right. Are there any other language barriers that exist when you're living in two different cultures?
So for me, one thing that like I was realizing actually after our conversation is the name. Like going back to the name, there were teachers who never pronounce my name. They would just go to Miss Morales. And I'm like, and now that I think about it as I'm older, I'm like, you shouldn't have done that. Like, you should have tried to say my name. Like, and that for me, I'm like, it does create this, not identity crisis, because for me personally, I didn't go through that identity crisis, but I was kind of like, I give up, just say my last name. Well, now that I'm older, I'm like, no, you're going to say it, and it does create a barrier when you're growing up, but, as you get older, you're just like, nah, we're gonna say this right, like whatever it is, we're gonna say it right.
I saw a meme and it was like, if you can pronounce Daenerys Targaryen,
yes,
you can certainly figure out how to pronounce my name.
yes, and it's true. I'm like, no, we're gonna go through this. You can do this. You're not gonna give me a nickname. You're not gonna call me Miss Morales. Like, we're gonna do this.
No, thank you for speaking up to that, because I think there's also other folks that are perhaps trying to find their way to amplify themselves in that way and amplify their voice in that way. And I think it's a reminder that it's okay to say, hey, listen, it might be a little bit difficult at first, I get it, maybe it's not something that your mouth is used to, movements that your mouth is used to making, but I can help you, don't be embarrassed, we'll figure this out together.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we do forget like that too, where like it's okay. My sister actually pointed this out yesterday. She's like, there's people who can't say my name, and it has nothing to do with them not trying. Simply, you got to change a whole accent. Like, we grew up with this accent. Like, you can't, sometimes it's just going to come out a little bit different, and that's okay. The point is you getting there. You're trying,